Okay, so I don't have a really cool presentation. I've got a talk. We'll just get into it. Also, if you had told me 4 years ago that the next talk that I was going to give in church was going to be about mushrooms, I would not have believed you. It's funny too, when I shared this with my wife, just that I was interested in mushrooms, her exact response is probably something like your own. All mushrooms are poisonous except for the ones you can buy in stores. And those ones are gross anyways, so who cares, right? Aside from that first statement that all mushrooms are poisonous, a lot of her concerns are probably your own concerns as well. So before I jump into it, I'll just let you know off the bat, here's some high-level takeaways. Very few mushrooms will actually kill you. That doesn't mean go and eat anything you can find. Most mushrooms have been shown to be beneficial, with some bordering on like ridiculously beneficial levels. For reasons I can't understand, most Americans are used to eating only button mushrooms, which are really gross and flavorless. And did I mention they also grow in poop? So yeah, don't want anything to do with that. No, mushrooms are mostly healthy and delicious and can be grown easily at home with very little investment. If it's interesting to you, I encourage you to give it a shot. Come up and talk to me, and I can share with you a little bit about my journey. I want to start by just sharing a couple of verses out of TNC 89. So from verse 4, it says, "All wholesome herbs God has ordained for the constitution and nature and use of man. Every herb in the season thereof, and every fruit in the season thereof, all to be used with prudence and thanksgiving." In verse 5, we get a provision as well that applies nicely. It says that all grain is good and for the use of man, and also the fruit of the vine, which bears fruit, whether in the ground or above the ground. The last thing that I'll mention that I actually believe applies to mushrooms as well, it comes from verse 3. Particularly in talking about tobacco, it says, I've just taken up the phrase that says that they're to be used with judgment and skill. So what is a mushroom? Mushroom is actually the reproductive organ, otherwise called a fruiting body or fruit, of subsurface fungal structures called mycelium. These secretive and complex networks of white fungal filament can be found on every part of Earth, from the depths of the ocean to the tops of the highest peaks and throughout the most arid and inhospitable deserts. This nearly indestructible member of our ecosystem are known best for being trailblazers. They're always the first life to begin to break down inorganic material, like rocks and minerals, into soil. If you've ever gone up into the mountains and you've seen lichen on rocks, you're witnessing the fungal process of taking elements out of rocks and putting them into soil. It's hard to overstate the importance of fungi in organic systems. One example of the fungi queendom's importance can be seen in our soil, like we've talked about. In any given cross-section of soil, mycorrhizal and mycelial fungal networks create soil communities and structures that become the basis for complex relationships that allow plants to flourish. Mycorrhizal relationships, for example, is the mutually beneficial relationship of fungi to living plants, to living plant roots. Through the entanglement of root structures and hyphae, which is the end of these fungal networks, nutrients are shared and distributed between plant life above the soil and fungal structures beneath. So vital are these relationships that a full 90% of plants require mycorrhizal symbiosis to survive. In all instances, the mycelium actually wraps around the plant root tips and enters into the root's cellular structure. In these relationships, nutrients are passed between the two partners. Plants photosynthesize and create sugars that are sent down to the fungus, while the hyphae extend deep into the soil to draw up water and nitrogen, phosphorus, and other nutrients. These fungal relationships expand a plant's root structure and absorption area by 10 to sometimes even 100-fold. Other benefits include reduced stress response, hydrophilic response to environmental pressures, and protection from soil pathogens. 90% of decomposition happens because of fungi. One of fungi's primary purposes in nature is the ability to move and transform nutrients through chemical decomposition processes. Because of their production of strong organic acids, fungi serve as the primary biological agent responsible for releasing nutrients from rocks and soil webs. Fungi are constantly unblocking unavailable nutrients and turning them back into soluble compounds that microbes, plants, and animals metabolize into tissue. Because of these properties, macrofungi, or what you know as a mushroom fruit, stand to be some of the healthiest foods nature can provide. Though relatively few species have been researched, edible mushrooms are highly nutritious and medicinal, just like plants. They are food and medicine literally in one. Despite our culture being mycophobic, which means having a fear of mushrooms generally, these principles were really well understood by our ancient ancestors. There's even a word in Chinese, yakuzan, which refers to food that incorporates medicinal mushrooms. Ancient Egypt, Babylon, China, Japan, Greece, Roman and Mesopotamian, and Islamic ancient texts all mention and depict mushrooms, mostly truffles in particular, as an important and valuable resource, particularly in times of drought. Mushrooms are rich in micronutrients like vitamin B complexes and macronutrients like minerals and calcium and magnesium. Because of their apparent alchemical properties, mushrooms are one of the few organic sources of germanium, an element that increases oxygen efficiency and increases resistance to disease. They're also the primary source of a little-known compound called selenium, which is a trace mineral that works with vitamin E to produce antioxidants. Selenium is linked to the reduction of cancer risk, arthritis, pancreatitis, and asthma. Because of their competition in the wild, mushrooms are naturally antibacterial. Mushrooms like reishi, lion's mane, chaga, cordyceps, and shiitake have all been shown to reduce the risk of cancer, improve cognitive function like memory, reduce the risk of Alzheimer's, lower cholesterol and blood pressure, and help even with anxiety and depression. One study in Japan 2 years ago showed that chaga mushrooms are effective in killing and combating COVID-19. These benefits, coupled with the fact that they can be grown easily in a low or no-tech environment at home, off of waste products like spent coffee grounds, wood chips, or even newspaper, make mushrooms an excellent addition to your at-home grown food efforts. Okay, so let's get into it. At its core, mushroom growing is the process of feeding this mycelial network a proper diet, keeping it protected from competition until it's grown to substantial size, then triggering that mycelium to produce the fruit bodies, or mushrooms. For indoor cultivation, there's 4 key stages of this process. I'm going to walk through it, but if you want to know more about this, you can come and talk to me at the booth after. So the first, spores, or a small amount of mycelium, is introduced in either a petri dish or sterile, which is filled with a sterile nutrified gel, or a jar filled with sterile nutrified water. Over the course of a few weeks, that mycelial network will begin to exponentially increase in size until it covers and fills the container. Once the network is large enough to be easily interacted with, the mycelium can be broken up to become inoculum. So a small amount of that agar or liquid inoculum mycelium is transferred then to a larger container filled with cooked or sterilized grains. Within a month, that mycelium will grow over and through these grains to create spawn. Healthy grain spawn is then used to inoculate the final fruiting substrate that will support a larger crop. Common substrates include wood, straw, coffee grounds, manure, or compost-based substrates. Between 2 and 12 weeks later, depending on the strain of mushroom, you'll have a fully colonized block with mycelium. Once that final substrate is fully consumed by the fungus, the mycelial mass will move itself into a humid environment to support the full development of mushrooms. The first crop, which is called a flush, is often produced within 1 to 2 weeks. With proper care, several subsequent flushes may develop over the preceding weeks and months. Once mycelium stops producing, the spent spawn can be applied to your garden in a variety of different ways. So in essence, the process has two primary phases. The first three phases are focusing on this vegetative growth stage of mycelium into spawn, while stage 4 is dedicated into the reproductive fruiting stage of the life cycle. By understanding the first couple stages of mycelial growth, substrate strategies can be applied to move indoor fungal cultivation outdoors, which effectively can transcend the limitations of an indoor growth and can really unlock the power and intelligence of the fungal queendom. Mushrooms, like all organic material in life, have basic requirements. Understanding these fundamental principles enables us to develop and introduce really creativity into how we engage with fungi and develop cultivation. So instead of focusing on how to grow mushrooms or how mushrooms can be cultivated, much more fruit can be yielded from asking why a project does or does not work. The 5 basic fungal needs are water, healthy diet, breath or the ability to breathe, warmth, and a proper surface to fruit on. So first, fungi need a lot of water, but not too much actually. It's in the sweet spot. Mycelial growth is powered by water. The presence or lack of water should be seen as the greatest limitation of any growth operation. Substrates should be hydrated to their maximum water holding state, known as field capacity. And then, too much water causes pooling, which creates kind of a breeding ground for additional fungi or other bacteria. Fungi need a healthy diet. The best diets for fungi are ones that reflect their natural habitat. Primary decomposers like wood lovers like shiitake, reishi, or lion's mane prefer fresh wood substrates, so wood that you might find out in your yard. While late-stage decomposers like agaricus mushrooms fruit best thoroughly through composted material. I've got a reference guide in some of my online resources too, if you want to look at different substrates. Fungi need to breathe as well. Unlike other plant species, fungi consume oxygen and produce CO2. In all stages of cultivation, fungi need oxygen, but in the early stages, limiting O2 and keeping high CO2 mimic the air quality found in soil and dense wood. This means that any container can be used for spawn production, and it will just need a little bit of holes for fresh air exchange. Airflow encourages the mushroom to fruit, with stagnant air as the main culprit for contamination. When mushrooms begin to arise from the mycelial network, the gas levels of CO2 and O2 are flipped, the mycelium changes, and the fruit bodies begin their natural expulsion from the substrate. Fungi need warmth. Fungi are interesting. They become dormant at colder temperatures. It's actually the secret to their everlasting life. A dramatic drop in temperature, a drop in temperature brings on a dramatic drop in metabolic rates and growth rates. Mushrooms will grow, though, in the same temperatures that humans prefer. Too cold and the mycelium will not pin. Likewise, too hot and the mushrooms that you had growing when the temperatures were right will begin to die off. So lastly, the mushrooms will need a proper fruiting surface. While mycelium can grow in any surface, shape, or direction, mushroom development is dependent on the structure or orientation of the fruiting surface. For example, some mushrooms, like turkey tail, are shelf mushrooms. They grow best horizontally, while others, like enoki, prefer to fruit vertically. Understanding this preference it will help you dictate how it is that you can grow and captivate mushrooms. So I know I'm well over time. Though mushrooms are not well understood, they stand as a powerful resource in a troubling season now fast approaching. In times past, they've proven to be a valuable means of food and medicine. Perhaps the most interesting element for me is the mushroom intelligence and the ability for remediation. Mushrooms can actually be trained to help remediate things like forever chemicals that have become a plague in our modern world. There's even a study that shows that mushrooms can remediate or mycelium can remediate the presence of heavy metals in an environment, which is actually kind of crazy when you think about it. In this individual study, they took the mycelium and they inoculated on a bed filled with cobalt. And when they picked the mushroom body itself, there was no presence of cobalt in the mushroom, which leads us to believe that the mushroom actually extracted the cobalt from the environment and then redistributed that deeper into the soil, where those heavy metals actually belong. So anyways, I'm hopeful that with careful study, time, and effort, the fungal queendom can yield her fruit and begin to rebuild the proverbial soil structures in the ground that we are now working. So I know that's a lot. Come by the booth if you want to know how to do it. If you want to taste mushrooms, I've got some. But yeah, thanks